What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Go Lead Everything podcast. Rockstar guest today. This woman is a geologist, no pun intended, with a bachelor's from Indiana University of PA, a master's from the University of Missouri, broad energy sector experience in startups through highly regulated large-scale organizations, as well as private equity-backed, public companies. She's been an executive for several different companies. Also has experience as a president and CEO, which is pretty cool. And she even recently completed the highly selective Women's Director Development Program at the Kellogg School of Executive Management. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to work with, learn from, work under this woman as one of my corporate leaders and colleagues at TC Energy. And I'm thrilled to have her on the show today. Wendy Straatmann, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Phil. Appreciate it.
So, Wendy, tell us a little bit about your story. Obviously, you've got a broad range of experience. How'd you get into leadership? Give us a little about your background, where you're from. How'd you get into geology?
Okay, great. No, I'm happy to answer that. Geology, it was kind of an accident, and a good one at that. When I first went to college, I knew I wanted to be a scientist. I loved physics. So I started out in physics, and I had to add another natural science one semester to my curriculum, and the line for biology was just too long for my day. So I saw this subject called geology, and the line was pretty short, and so I asked if it would fulfill my requirement. It surely did, and I fell in love with geology from that, because it's a good mix of physics and chemistry and biology all wrapped together, and really it fit my analytical style. So I started out in geology, and then ended up in oil and gas. Certainly wasn't by design at first, but when I learned about the oil and gas industry from geology, I thought, wow, that's where I want to be. Oil and gas industry, any energy aspect, it matters, and I wanted to be part of that. One great quote I heard a while ago was, energy isn't aspirational, meaning, heat and for cooking and all of that sort of thing. It's something that we need. Our standard of living depends on cheap energy and reliable energy. And so because it matters so much to everyone's life every day, it's like that just really attracted me to oil and gas and energy and industry in general. So that's really kind of how I got into it. And from there, I did manage my own career with different companies. If you stay with a major, they're going to move you around every 1 to maybe 3 years. And if you're, a high performer, they'll do that, and you can do that within one company. But being with smaller companies, I had to do that on my own, and I got a great variety of experiences and with those different business types. So I got to learn a lot from that, and so that's been a great path for me. It's helped me get to where I'm at now.
Super duper cool. I love your why behind getting into energy, and I wish mine wasn't as shallow as it is compared to yours. I went to engineering school because I knew my dad was an engineer who worked in energy, and I knew what engineers who worked in energy made. And I was like, well, that's better than, working for the city or doing that. But, getting to TC and hearing, delivering the energy people need every day, and really understanding that valuable service to the communities in which we live and work. That's a huge why behind energy that lots of people maybe take for granted. Who maybe aren't as exposed to the industry.
Oh, for sure. And actually, it shouldn't be taken for granted. That's how we operate in the U.S. anyway, is that we have this reliable source and this great standard of living that, frankly, a lot of others in the world would like to be part of as well. So I don't mind it being taken for granted, but then again, that presents its challenges when folks don't fully understand the necessity of it. And so we can talk about that in depth all day long if you want on the supply and demand side. But
yeah, we're kind of branching into the detailed energy conversation early. I know you've put out some articles on it. or at least shared some of your perspective. What do you think about energy and the energy transition and kind of where we're headed globally from an energy perspective? You touched on it a bit, but maybe just elaborate a little more.
Oh, sure. Happy to. You know, what you see in the news and the press right now is a lot of the talk on the supply side, on clean energy, and that's a good conversation. However, the demand side of that conversation is lacking, and it's certainly not lost on you and I, but on others. They may not understand that demand is only increasing for energy as population grows globally. And so oil and gas will certainly be a part of that energy mix for a long, long time to come. There's no getting around that. And but I certainly do subscribe to the clean pathway as well, because we need clean energy sources as well. And so we are in this transition, and we need to talk about transitioning pragmatically. It can't happen overnight. It can't happen in 20 years, truly. We're talking about massive infrastructure changes. And so I think that we kind of have to get back to that discussion on it, that going back to that quote, energy is not aspirational, right? It's not something we aspire to. We have to have it. And so getting that piece into the conversation and talking about the demand that's really there is really important. I don't think people are ready for rolling brownouts or blackouts to, happen on a consistent basis, because we just don't have the supply in place right now from just singular clean energy sources. So again, I think oil and gas has to be part of that talk and be realistic part of the conversation. And I'd like to do what I can to drive that.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And the perspective that, there's still billions of people potentially out there that don't have access to the energy and the lifestyle that we do. And with all this supply that we do have, how do we even get those groups of people to a certain standard of living? Even, I think there's some social obligation maybe there.
Yeah, I heard that as well. And yes, and there's, again, oil and gas is part of the mix. Mm-hmm. There's some really remote places that, I'm probably going to break away from oil and gas a bit, but for those remote places, solar makes a lot of sense, mm-hmm. So I know I would push that, because it is certainly part of the solution. We just have to kind of, again, think pragmatically about the whole globe, if you will, in that sense.
Sure. We touched a little bit on your broad career experience. What's your favorite experience that you've had, and why is it your favorite?
Oh man, there's so many. I would say I really enjoyed TC Energy, recent experience, and that was really got into leading a team more on the coaching side. I found throughout my career I'm gravitating to more of a coaching style and getting management teams to think about strategy on their own and all of that. And I was put into a position at one point at TC where I had to gain the trust of the folks that would be working with me very quickly. And it was a pretty big organization. And so I couldn't just bring my own thoughts to the table. I had to get the team to come up with their own on, and then hold them accountable for what they came up with as far as strategies and development go. And I think I did a pretty good job at that, and brought some really great leaders into that team and organization, and got opportunities for others that they're excelling in. And I really like watching that happen. So I would say that's probably the most satisfying one. Now, there were certainly others, like a great example was, I was at a company where they had some significant safety issues. I mean, every week somebody could have been killed. And that was really a rough time for them and for me, and lots of sleepless nights and stuff. And So I worked with my team very hard to come up with a strategy on how to keep the machine rolling without sacrificing that safety aspect. And we were really successful at eliminating the safety incidents. We really cut back. You know, the organizational capacity just wasn't there to do as much as we were being asked to do. And so pulling back while still meeting our metrics for productivity is really a significant contribution as well that I'm pretty proud of.
That's awesome. The kind of touching on the importance of energy. Other people often, and I'm like, for example, like I see that little gas meter in front of my house now, totally differently after being in energy, and the seriousness of decisions at the corporate executive level. You know, having a fiduciary responsibility to a company that has such an obligation to the community. Like, what's that pressure like? You know, what goes through your mind as an executive when you know that really you have that level of responsibility, and honestly, you know, people's lives are potentially at stake?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's always pressure, but I like to think that once someone gets to that level, that they understand that responsibility pretty well and handle it. You know, there's always multiple, I'd say, points that come into play, and you have to work with a group of other people to make that decision. You learn that it's never about you, and you're not only the one making the decision. It's usually a collective effort. It has to be at the end of the day, because these decisions are so critical. Because you're like, it can be a life and death situation when you're doing that. And so again, you know, bringing all the different lenses to the table, whether it's a regulatory lens, a safety lens, an economic lens, and putting that all together and having some good discussions with others on the right path forward is where you end up going. So, you know, the pressure kind of gets, I guess, disseminated somewhat because you are with a group of people that, you know and trust and work through that together.
So you mentioned how you gravitated toward more of a coaching sort of mentality in your leadership role. How did you get into leadership? Was there a moment where you realized that you were passionate about leadership versus being an individual contributor?
You know, there was never that singular moment that struck me as, hey, this is what I want to do. It was always for me, it was a series of moments, I would say, as I went along my career. You know, sometimes it was being at the right place at the right time, nothing magical about it. And an opportunity came up and I was just happened to be there, and it was a great opportunity. Sometimes it was, you know what, I had to move my family and go to a different area and, you know, really talk with my family, and I get support from them. And I guess some other close confidants that I had to say, is this the right thing for me to do? Because, you know, I kind of felt like, hey, this step felt normal and natural for me. You know, so I would say that, yeah, I have a scientific background, and I like I spent a good 10 years probably doing the professional side, but then, you know, as I matured, it was, I think I can lead a team. I like leading teams. I grew in strategic thinking, and I got pretty good at that. And then it was like, okay, the piece I was missing was developing people. And so I worked on that, you know, and it was fun. So I would just say it was just kind of a series of moments all along.
Very cool. Very cool. I know you've recently completed the Women's Director Development Program. Tell us a little bit about that and what you learned from that program at Kellogg.
Okay. Well, that was a fantastic program. And what I would say about that is I learned that what organizational fit means. You know, it's not about sameness. It's more about that what you can bring to the table as a unique contributor and bringing your perspective in. And so having a fit from that standpoint, rather than necessarily being the same as everybody else. I think that was really important for me to learn from that experience, and that, having this broad career background that I have is actually pretty valuable. I feel like I can go into any organization, and bringing that big, broad background with me, I can come up with a strategy that will fit whatever that business needs at that time. And so, that was something else I learned about myself at that course. And then they also brought forward the, coaching style, as you go and leave maybe management opportunities and go for that board of director role, you're not managing day to day anymore. You're not even building the strategy, but you're asking the questions that help others, build strategies, and making sure that they're covering all aspects that could come in from a risk perspective, from an economic perspective, and certainly safety, those sorts of things. So it's that coaching style that really came out of that class as well. So
very cool. Very cool. I've always wondered, because I've thought about getting my MBA. I know many that have. I've heard different opinions on going and getting more high-level executive education. Is it something that you highly recommend?
That's a good question, because I've seen it where people have gotten MBAs, and then maybe it was in a time in their career where they couldn't use it right afterwards. Mm-hmm. And then it ended up kind of getting lost. I mean, education is something people can't ever take away from you, and it's good to have. I would never say never get an MBA, but be prepared to use it afterwards. Are you you use it within a couple of years, get yourself a position for an opportunity in a company that you're in, or some other company that can use aspects of that education to really put it to good use. Because I've seen folks that they've gotten it and then they're still doing their professional engineering work or geologic work for years afterwards. Mm-hmm. Again, having the background is great, but hopefully you can use it. And that's the key.
Yeah, I totally agree. You see some folks get it right out of university with little to no experience, and I imagine going back, after 5 or 10 years experience would be way more valuable.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that.
Your recent article, you posted an article about your 5-pronged approach to developing high-performance teams. Tell us a little bit about your approach, and maybe a time where you've used that approach effectively at one of the organizations you've been a part of.
Well, I've used it multiple times effectively, I like to say. So that approach means it's kind of it's a 5-point star, and it's, having the right management processes in, having the right metrics / motivators in place. Organizational structure, it's important as well. Information flows. How does information flow within your organization? That's pretty critical. And then decision rights, who has them, and make sure that that's clear. So that's the approach. Now, all of that is tied to the culture and the vision and the strategy. That's kind of the center point of that star. And so whenever I've gone into a new situation, became a leader of a new team, I've kind of applied that and to see, okay, where are we with those 5 different aspects? A lot of times when I see if it's a team that's struggling, it's not one of the 5 aspects. They're still kind of back at the central nugget where the cultural alignment isn't there. That's where I found most teams struggle with that. And once they kind of get their vision down and their cultural alignment in place, those 5 prongs can kind of really sort themselves out. And so, I would say I have to think metrics and motivators are probably one of the most important to kind of get done. I am a metric person. I love those. And, measure what you measure is be careful about that, right? That whole adage, be careful about what you measure, because that's what you're going to get as your result. It's very true. And so if you have the right metrics in place, and you have to be flexible with them, they'll change over time. But if you have those right metrics in place, that means that you have a good strategy is in place behind that, and you're all pointed in the right alignment. Say you're all working on the same initiatives. So those all kind of, the output is the metric. And so if you got that right, you've got a lot of other things right in your organization. So sometimes I've used it at TC, certainly with as you're familiar with the technical operational services team. The directors that worked with me, they designed the vision themselves. I facilitated that. So that was the coaching aspect. But by having them design it and owning it themselves, I could hold them accountable to that vision and ask them the question, okay, now does this align with the vision of where we're trying to go as an organization? And then that question takes the pause, and it's like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't, or maybe I should add this in or something like that. And so our conversations evolve that way. So I've used it effectively, I think, with that organization and past organizations I've worked with. It's always really come down to those 5 keys. Structure. Multiple different kinds of structures can work within an organization. Some lean more towards standardization approaches, and some lean to more kind of innovative, fast approaches. And either one can work. It's just, sometimes you have to have more mature leadership within the more structured approach. And because you're going to have more kind of dashed line links to others. And sometimes that gets folks crosswise. But if everyone has the same metrics, they should be motivated to go the same direction. So again, getting that alignment.
One thing I love about the approach is I think it leads you to ask the right questions. And I'm a big believer that questions really drive our thinking. And in those situations, like you just gave that example, asking that right question, does this align with our values? And it really kind of directs you to make sure you're asking those right questions. As you're developing people, how do you go about developing people? What's your approach? You mentioned that's something that you've had the opportunity to do more recently in your career. How do you go about that? Because as a young aspiring leaders, maybe haven't thought about that as much as people that have had experience.
Yeah, it's a very unique, individualized approach for every single person, and I use different leadership styles within the same person sometimes. It all depends on their competency and their capabilities, and you have to do a little bit of an assessment, of those, yourself and with them, and say, how good are they at having the right competencies in place, the skill sets to do the work that they're trying to do, and then do they have the motivation to do it? And so that's always another key. So what do I need to do as a leader to, one, adjust the motivation if it needs to be adjusted, and get them the skill sets that they need to have? Example is I had one leader, great on the business side, understood the business metrics and drivers from an economic standpoint, but the new kind of engineering aspects were actually new. That person had never done that work before. So in that new area, I was very directive, in meaning like I'm that bird on the shoulder saying, okay, make sure you ask your team this question, this very specific question, ask them, and then that's going to lead you into some more questions on your own. And they're like, oh, okay, yes. But when it comes to building the strategy around the economics of what they were managing, I just leave them alone and say, yeah, you let me know what you've come up with, and I'm going to let you run on that, so it depends on the role that person is in and what their competency and capabilities are for it. And I'll change my style to help either being directive, coaching, anything like around that. I'll adjust. So I think great. You just do it individualized, right? Know your people.
Yeah, you got to know your people. And I think it's very easy with how busy organizations are today. We're stretched really thin. And I think it's easy to get caught up in sort of the day-to-day busyness of the
Yes.
asks and not focus on really getting to know and understand what drives and motivates your people. Um,
Yeah. Mm.
how does your thought process change going from a vice president role to a president and CEO sort of role? Like, does there a different thought process in your approach? Because I know you spent several years as a president and CEO prior to coming to TC again as a VP.
Right.
Just curious.
It's actually more driven by the size of the company. Being a president of something small, you wear all the hats. You don't have to have very strong processes or whatever because you know the guy down the hall to go talk to, right? And then being a VP in TC Energy, it's a very big organization. My thought process has to change in that, we actually need structure. People aren't necessarily going to know who the person is to do this other role. And so you have to have like a process in place. And you have to balance that with actually making sure work gets done. Don't over process, but you don't want to have an under as well. So it's always a balance as an organization is in a growth mode like TC Energy is adjusting the processes because people come and go in those roles a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, having things kind of a workflow in place is helpful to the person coming into the role, as well as everybody else in the organization understanding what that person's responsibilities are. But, going back to when I was a president and CEO, it was a small company. I have not been a president or a CEO of a large company, I'll say that. But, probably something similar would be more of a vice president in a larger company. So it's all about understanding your business situation and what's needed in that particular situation to have that thought process shift.
Yeah, very interesting. I'd imagine, when the buck stops with you, it's a very different mentality sort of too, that, it's everything, it's either you or nobody else, right? It's a different level of thought, I guess, and pressure.
Yeah, it's definitely more on the financial pressure side,
Sure.
I grant you that, on it should be as well in a smaller one, but you just have some blinders on when you're in a vice president role in a large organization, you do have blinders on because you can't see the big machine as clearly. And so there's some safety in that, I would say, when you talk about pressure. But when you're the president of a smaller company, yeah, everything else is on you. Everybody else's livelihood matters to you very, very, very much. So. Yeah.
Very cool. So switching gears a little bit, I know you're a lover of the outdoors.
Yes.
Talk about your favorite outdoor adventures and what do you like to do most in your outdoor activities?
Wow. So anything out of doors is great. So I think that's what kind of guided me towards geology and looking at rocks. But so right now, hiking and biking are my favorite things to do outdoors. And actually, I'm going to go to one of our great national parks here next week and to socially distance from everybody and do a lot of hiking and look at some beautiful scenery. And we're talking, 10-mile plus hikes, daily. So I do enjoy the hiking. Biking is always fun because you see a whole lot more because you can go a lot further than just 10 miles. But so I would say that those are the two things that I like the most right now.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. We're going to do a kind of a lightning round of other questions. So favorite movie?
Moonstruck.
Moonstruck. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Favorite book?
Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck.
Okay. Classic.
Yeah.
Favorite quote? You said a quote already, but favorite quote?
Oh no, yeah, and this is one I've heard pretty recent. It's be stubborn about your goals, but flexible about your methods. And that's a J.J. Watt.
Oh, that's a J.J. Watt quote. I like
That is a J.J. Watt quote. Yes.
My wife likes J.J. Watt too.
Yeah.
So, favorite podcast?
Go lead everything.
I knew I'd either get that answer or another good one for sure.
Yeah.
All right, last one. What about favorite food?
Salmon.
Oh, really? Salmon,
Yes,
huh?
I can eat it every day.
Okay, I lied. One more.
Yeah.
One favorite way to waste time.
Social media. Sometimes in the evenings before I go to sleep, I scroll probably too much. But yeah.
It's interesting. What's your overall perspective on social media? I've gotten more into it over the last couple months as I've branched out into this Go Leave Everything adventure. Notice you're fairly active on LinkedIn specifically. What are you on other media platforms? What's your approach to social media?
Um, it's a tool, just like lots of other avenues are, meeting face to face. But it's a great tool for getting communications out quickly to a lot of people. Now, your message may get lost in that, and so you have to be a little bit careful about that. But I think it is a great tool. I mean, we've seen it change, um, you know, actually countries, right? So I'm a fan of social media. It has its drawbacks where there's a lot of misinformation that can be out there as well. You just have to be smart and think about what you're looking at, and again, what you're putting out on that platform. So I'm a big fan of social media at the end of the day.
I'd have to agree. When it came out, I was in my high school days. So, when we got to the work world, it was like, everybody, turn off your social media when you're interviewing for jobs so they don't see all those pictures of you drinking in college or whatever. But I agree. I think it's a tool. I think it's definitely something that you can use very purposefully. And as you see, the political landscape, I think, has changed dramatically because of certain individuals using it very purposefully.
Yes.
So I'd have to agree with you. What advice do you have for aspiring women who are interested in pursuing leadership at high levels? And maybe talk about a unique challenge that you faced as a woman in leadership.
Okay. All right. So the first part of that question is, you know, I think for women or any kind of represented group, you need to have kind of somebody to help champion you. You need an extra voice out there. Um, you know, a lot of people have connections, in industry. It's like, oh, I got this job because I know somebody, and that's very common. But, minority groups, they may not have those connections. And so, I think that that's something that folks really need to consider. So for women in particular, I've read a lot about, get a higher level female mentor. And that is great. There's some perspective there that can be drawn upon that's unique and useful in that situation. But what I would say more important is to get a man that's out there champions you and is your advocate, is your mentor, because at the end of the day, in most companies, most management, most board of directors, they're mostly still male dominated. It's not 50% women yet. And so those connections really are made through men. They have the power to advocate for you. So if I were to advocate for more diversity in an organization, that could come across as, well, you're a woman, of course you're going to say that. But if a man were to say that, it has a lot more meaning. It really does. And so I would encourage women to reach out to male mentors, or try to get that somebody on their side from within an organization or outside the organization is just as important. So that would be my advice. But it is very common for a woman to seek out another woman. And I always try to tell them, go try to find a guy at the end of the day, because it's helpful. So that would be kind of the message I would say. Now, some things I've experienced, I mean, I have laundry lists of them. And, from early on in my career, I was pregnant and I came back to work after I had my baby, and I had found out that there were bets in the office on whether I was going to come back to work or not. Now, the fact that I was coming back to work never even crossed my mind that I wasn't going to, right?
Sure,
but yeah,
sure.
it was out there. And, my supervisor said he was surprised that I came back. And I'm like, wow, did not understand that hurt. At the end of the day, it did. It was like, well, that's how they view me, and it can knock you down a peg. It can take the confidence out of you if you experience things like that. And that's something small, but the impact can be so meaningful and so great. And so that was one. And those are the things you kind of ignore, let slide, and let your work, answer to those types of things that come forward. But a lot of times, even recently, I'm certainly used to being the only woman in a room, in a meeting. But that's not okay anymore. And I'm learning to find my voice and get that message out. Like, we have had lots of service companies come into TC Energy, and they'll have an entourage of all white men with them. Not that being a white man is a bad thing. Sure. I'm just saying there isn't that diversity there. And I am able to then tell somebody that maybe is superior to me and say, hey, did you notice that? Because I certainly noticed it every time. I'm comfortable in that situation, but I notice it. I said, and we talked about it, and then they were really pretty smart in saying, hey, well, I can probably ask them in a way that says, like, hey, diversity is important to TC Energy. What does your company think about diversity? And I thought that was a really great solution of how this person could bring it up. But the problem came when that person said, oh, well, why don't you say that? Would you like to say that? And I'm like, wait, it's not as impactful as it is coming from me as it would be from a guy. Because if you notice your leaders saying that, you tend to say, okay, that's what's important to that leader. And you're going to then start to mirror that, right? You're going to take the cues at least from that. So I think it's important for you, Phil, as you continue in your career progression, to kind of keep those things in mind, with whatever minority type group that you might be working with. If you see something, try to figure out a great way to bring it up. Sure. And people are taking cues from you the whole time. So those would be some of the things that I've experienced.
That's really interesting. And a perspective, I mean, I'd thought of the uncomfortability of maybe how it is for most women. Like, I can imagine going to a room full of women only and being the only guy in a room at a business meeting, which would not typically happen at an energy company, just by history. Right. But, it definitely would be different. And yeah, that's a good perspective, Wendy. You've touched on mentorship a little bit and seeking out mentors. Have you had mentors that have had a huge impact on your life? And how have they helped you most? Maybe what's some of the best advice that they've given you?
I have, and I still have several. I have, some people like to call them their personal board of directors. I certainly have them. And, the impact is, choosing ones that are supportive of you. They're kind of like your cheerleaders, but somebody who will also tell you the hard truth, if you need that as well. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that can help bring your confidence back if something has happened and where you're like, wow, should I have done that? Or something else going on in your life, either whether it's personal or professional life. And if that person says, can have that step back and see the big picture for you and help you clear your head and say, hey, no, you did the right thing. Everything is going to be fine. You're this, and that. And these are all really wonderful qualities. Go out and get it, And that is always good to hear. Everybody needs to hear those positive things about them every once in a while. You don't want to get a big head about it, but you still need it, right? Even the best of us. So
Yeah, I agree. It always is nice to hear. I know I've noticed over the last couple of years that maybe in my younger days, I valued that feedback maybe a little more than I should have. And I don't know if you listen to a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. He's very popular. I've listened to quite a bit of his stuff recently, but he talks a lot about, not listening to the boos or the cheers and trying to just be even keel and, doing the right thing for you and making the right decisions based on your motivation being right. And I really like that perspective because I think sometimes people may tend to lean on that maybe more than they should. But I totally agree with you that sometimes, especially when you're feeling down, it's nice to hear, some of that good feedback and perspective as well. Having somebody on your side is always good.
yeah, and it's a great tool for building teams. So for when I first got the TOS organization there at TC Energy, I had a lot of new members come onto that team. We didn't know each other that well, and to help build the team camaraderie, we went and we took a whiteboard and just wrote down. Everyone had to take turns of saying good positive qualities about a specific person in that room, and that was that. They're really good at this, and we had pages on each person.
Wow.
And I'm like, now you take that page. I actually typed it up for them and had it delivered. And I said, now, when you're feeling bad at work someday, you take that page out and look at what all of your coworkers said about you, all these really wonderful things, and pick yourself up by the bootstraps and get back after it. And so that can work too. And that's just a good tool for your team.
Yeah, I think that's great.
The things that weren't so good about everybody.
My mom has always repeated the phrase "praise people to success," and I'm a big believer in that. You want to encourage those good behaviors and not necessarily focus on discouraging bad ones. Even you want to discourage bad ones, but I think you do by encouraging that good behavior.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm curious: are you a woman of faith? And if
Yes.
so, how does your faith background shape your perspective on leadership?
So the answer to that is yes. And I would say I'm probably the average bear in that. I don't lean on it probably as much as I could or draw from it as much as I could. But what it does is I feel like it gives me a good moral anchor on what is right and how to treat people at the end of the day. And that's really what I draw from it. I hear a thing, sometimes hope isn't a plan. Surely it's not a plan, but if you don't have hope, then you can't even build a plan. So I think with faith, you have faith and hope. It helps you be positive and seeing that there's a way to make something happen. Mm-hmm. So those are the things I would say.
Yeah, those are great. I totally think that the motivation is so key, and that approach to how you interact with other people, and faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love, and really acting out of love towards people can be tough when maybe you disagree about something, or they're not treating you as well as you might want to be treated. Yeah. So it's huge, and having that source of truth, I think, is so key and helpful to navigate the world. So yes. I'm curious, do you have daily habits that have helped you along your success journey? And if so, what are they?
Yes. So One is exercise. I try to do something, every day around that. And so I think that helps, mind, body, and soul. I think, but the body piece is very, very helpful and helps you with having a clear head and direction. You can think things through and having that reflection time. I think exercise is great for that. And the other piece for that is always my family. It's so important to me. I make sure that they're engaged in what I'm doing and what I'm feeling like, so that they can be a support for me and I can be that support for them. And so I think that those are two of the things that have helped me out a great deal.
Awesome. Very cool. It's it can be challenging, especially when you're as busy as I know executives are, to make sure you're keeping time with your family a priority. So that's huge.
Yes.
And so, Wendy, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've loved our conversation. Tell us what you're up to. Tell us where people can find you. What's going on?
So as you mentioned, I'm active on LinkedIn, so you can always message me and I'll respond on LinkedIn, certainly. So that's a really good way to find me. What I'm up to is, I'm out looking for my next opportunity, but I'm also quite, I guess I'd say, pragmatic about it, that it might take me a couple of years in finding the right fit. I've had a couple of opportunities so far. And, sometimes the hardest thing to do is to say no to them. It's like, oh, but if it's just not the right time or fit for you, then you have to kind of go pass on that chance and move on. So that's kind of what I'm up to. Reading, I just finished a book called White Fragility. I picked that up off the news when some CEO was flying on Southwest Airlines and was reading that. And I thought, oh, I should get that book. And so I just finished that book, and that was real helpful. So staying up with, some really good reading now, and doing some online classes, because I think that's what everybody has to do during these times. So doing those sorts of things, and certainly spending time with my immediate family.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, hey, everybody, go follow Wendy. Appreciate you, Wendy, coming on the show. Thanks for all the advice, the tips, and the mentorship that you've given me, and I know many others as well. So you take care, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Phil. It's been my pleasure.